last February to watch the movie Hidden Figures, and we since found out that our own Janet Gibson has a rather cool mom who was actually coming into town for another Women's Network event and was willing to come and speak for us today. She's the first one who I can read from the back of a book about, so please humor me while I do. Starting in World War II and moving through the Cold War, the Civil Rights Movement, and the space race, Hidden Figures follows the interwoven accounts of Dorothy Vaughan, Mary Jackson, Katherine Johnson, and Christine Darden. 4 African-American women who participated in some of NASA's greatest successes. It chronicles their careers over nearly 3 decades as they faced challenges, forged alliances, and used their intellect to change their own lives and their country's future. We are extremely excited today to have Dr. Christine Darden with us. She's going to talk about her career and being featured in a wonderful book, and of course being the mother to our own Janet. So with that, please help me in welcoming Dr. Christine Darden.
Well, thank you so very much. It is wonderful to be here at this today, and I'm pleased to see so many people here in the audience. I always wonder exactly what I'm supposed to talk about when I go to talk. I talk to a lot of students, and I've even talked to some kindergarten classes, so I've had a broad range of activity this year. But as I think about Hidden Figures, the spectacularly successful book by Margot Shetterly and its related movie, there's no way I could have predicted this year and how it has changed my life. And part of that has been because Katherine Johnson is 99 years old. The other 2 ladies are deceased, so I'm the only one still around who kind of go around and talk to people. And I've done a lot of that since January, since the movie came out. Margot Shetterly called me in 2011 to discuss the computers at Langley and to tell me she was thinking about writing a book about some of these ladies. I hadn't seen Margot since she was 8 or 9 years old, when she would come to the picnics out at Langley Research Center with her dad, who worked there in atmospheric sciences. But in 2011, Margot and her husband were living in Mexico, where they had started a business of an online magazine in Mexico. They had come to Hampton to visit her parents for a short time, and when they went to church that Sunday, they saw Margot's Sunday school teacher. And her dad said, "Well, there's Miss Land, your Sunday school teacher. You know, she was a computer at Langley." And her dad starts talking about what the computers at Langley did. And Margot's husband spoke up and said, "Well, if the computers at Langley did all of that, how come I've never heard about them?" And Margot said, "You know, I grew up with all these ladies, and I would go out to Langley, and so I never gave it a second thought, you know. I thought everybody worked like this, and you know, there were ladies doing this kind of work everywhere." But she said, as she thought about what her husband, she says, maybe there's a story that needs to be told here. And she started thinking about that. And I believe the first person she went to visit again was Katherine Johnson. She got her mother and dad to take her to see Katherine, who was about 92 at that time. And she interviewed Katherine, and she got some other names and started interviewing some of the other people that lived in Hampton around there. And Margot worked as a financial analyst on Wall Street. She was a finance major at the University of Virginia. She worked on Wall Street for a while. She stopped that job and went around the world for about 1.5 years by herself. Then she came back to New York and ran a TV show that's similar to Shark Tank. And then she got married and moved to Mexico and started an online magazine. So she has a certain, she's got an intellect certainly. She's innovative in what she does. She's a very smart young lady, and writing skills. So Margot had a good background in writing also. And so after I talked to Margot on the phone, when she would come back into town over the years, we would have lunch together. We would talk about the progress that she was making on interviewing other computers, on her writing, on the progress on the on the book that she was writing. Now, I didn't know at the time, but a news article that was written last year after the book came out said that Margot had submitted a 50-page proposal to 16 publishers around 2014. And during the next month, she received 14 rejections. I certainly didn't know about that. But Margot told me that at that time, that she was thinking about going to a university to study writing. And I actually wrote some letters of recommendation for her. But a few months later, in September of 2015, I believe it is, she got a contract. And that contract says, we want the book in a year. We want the completed book out in a year. So that meant she couldn't go to school. She had been accepted at the University of Virginia to its writing program, but so she couldn't do that. And about a month after she got the book contract, she got a call from Hollywood. Now, who would have thought that? I said, well, there must be a connection, a hotline from book publishers to Hollywood. So anyway, this lady in Hollywood had seen the proposal that she wrote, and she called and said, this has to be a movie. She apparently knew Pharrell Williams, astronaut Leland Melvin, who we all know at Langley, knew Pharrell Williams. He's from Virginia Beach. They got him to put some money into this movie, and I mean, it just all worked together because they were in the industry. And it was just fantastic. So Margot wrote the book, and the script writer that they had hired wrote the script for the movie at the same time, from the hard points that Margot had put in her proposal. And Margot tells the stories of how the script writer would send her a draft and she'd say, oh no, it didn't happen that way, it didn't happen that way. And the script writer said, wait a minute, you cannot write a movie like you write a book. So you have to have some flexibility, and you want the movie to be interesting, you want the people to come back and see the movie and anything like that. So Margot was taught how to write scripts in the process. But so the Hidden Figure book was released in September of 2016, and the movie came out in December of 2016, just 2 or 3 months later. They filmed most of the movie in Atlanta, around some of the colleges down there, and they did the wind tunnel scenes at Lockheed Martin's wind tunnel in Marietta, Georgia. I, of course, was in the book, but not in the movie, and that was because I was 15 to 25 years behind the 3 ladies that were in the movie. They all worked in the segregated West computers at Langley, and that I did not have an experience with. All 3 of these movie characters were still at Langley when I entered Langley in 1967, 2 years before they walked on the moon. So NASA had been in existence for a while. I actually, Sputnik went up my senior year in high school. I collected the paper to take to my library, and the headline was Sputnik, Russians launched Sputnik, has orbited over the Earth so many times in the last 24 hours, and everybody got really scared because, gosh, they might drop a bomb on us. And I remember all the excitement in the school systems when that happened. So that was my high school experience. But I never worked with either of the 3 ladies directly at NASA. Katherine Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan, or Mary Jackson. I did work with Mary and Katherine in a technical group that we had there on the center that worked with students. We worked with middle and high school students and college students, giving math contests, giving SAT tutorials, and having student symposiums for college students who worked at internship jobs during the year to come to the center and give a paper, a technical presentation on their work, which gave them experiences in giving technical presentations, which I thought was extremely valuable since I was in graduate school before I had the opportunity to do that. The characters of all the 3 ladies were captured well in the movie. They all did excellent work, even in the face of the discrimination that they faced. they spoke up and they said what they wanted, what they would like to move to in their jobs. I love Dorothy Bond's comment when she was talking to Mary Jackson at one point, and she said, you need to learn all you can and be valuable to somebody. And I think that's an extremely astute statement that she made. And it was Dorothy also who noticed what was going on around her. The electronic computer was going to displace their jobs. She, in the movie, of course, went to the library and got a book on Fortran programming, and she went back and she taught all of the West computers to program. In fact, in the movie, she got the computer, the IBM computer running when the IBM man couldn't get it running. So, and I think that march, her leading those, teaching the people programming, led to that grand march that was always shown in the trailers in the movie of them marching from the West colored computer's office over to the IBM machine. Now, Mary Jackson did her homework when she was convincing the judge to let her attend the all-white Hampton High School so she could be converted and work as an engineer at Langley. She figured out what was the most important topic to the judge and helped use that information to help win his support. Are you going to be remembered for doing such and such? Are you going to be remembered for giving permission to the first black attendee to Hampton High School? And he says, well, probably the first black attendee to Hampton High School. And he ruled in her favor so she could go and take those courses. And of course, Katherine Johnson did those calculations that provided answers for her boss to satisfy the military and NASA personnel for the launch, landing, and everything that was going on there. They all did their work well. And I believe I was hired 15 years later because of the quality of the work that they did. I was in the next generation, and I was on their shoulders. Catherine's daughter was my classmate, Mary's niece was my classmate, Dorothy Bond's son was my classmate. And so we kind of had a group of people in my class that were connected to all of these ladies. So what was my dream job? As a child in school, I liked mathematics, but when I took plane geometry in high school, I absolutely fell in love with it. The teacher was wonderful, the class was great, and I did exceptionally well. So I decided then that I wanted to be a mathematician. I disregarded the fact, however, that plane geometry was the highest level of mathematics I had in high school. Neither high school that I attended in North Carolina, I'm from a small town in North Carolina near Charlotte, neither of those high schools offered a class beyond plane geometry. And so I go off to college in the fall of 1958 to major in math. And most of my classmates who were there planning to major in pure mathematics came from Tidewater, Virginia, Washington, D.C., New York, larger school systems where they all had trigonometry, analytical geometry, and calculus. And I just said, well, I'll just have to start out with the basic mathematics 101, but I'm going to do that. Then my daddy called and said, well, Christine, you know, this is 1958, and there are few, if any, pure mathematics jobs for an African-American female in this country. I want you to be able to get a job when you finish college. So I think you should major in mathematics education and get a teacher's certificate. So I'm not quite sure when this formula crystallized in my brain, but it was what I was calling the P to the 4 framework and of getting to a dream career. And the 4 P's were: perceive of yourself in the job you want to do. Perceive of myself in my dream job. Then the second P, plan what courses and background you need to get into a job like that. And then the third P was prepare. So you work your plan. You prepare for that job by working the plan that you had made. And then fourth P was persist. Persist through all the detours and blocked roads you're going to run into it in your journey. Now, for an aside, as I've spoken around the country this year, I'm leaning toward adding a fifth P to the beginning of these 4 Ps. And that fifth P would be project. That job that you think would be your dream job, and I'm talking to students here, you need to think about, is that a job that's growing, or is it a job that's dying? You need to think about, is this a job that's going to have a decent salary, or is it minimum wage kind of thing? Because I realize there are a lot of students out here that don't think about that. Robots and artificial intelligence are eliminating jobs every day, and new jobs created are requiring higher and different skills, generally STEM skills, that many of them are dropping out of in high school. So as I've talked to them, I have encouraged them that they need to stay in and get as much as they can, because most of the new jobs are requiring those skills, and we're trying to keep them there so they can be prepared. Now, going back to my daddy's wishes, I had already perceived of myself as a mathematician. And after thinking and looking at the courses and the background I would need, I knew that I needed to take a lot of higher math courses. But my dad was looking out for me. He said I would do as he said. I would major in mathematics education, and that was going to require me to take 30 hours of education courses, and it would require fewer of the mathematics courses, because this was high school education. I would minor in physics, but I would use all of my non-specified electives to take as many of the higher math courses as I could that were required for the pure math majors, but not for the education majors. And so I did that. And this was my course over the next 4 years. My senior year schedule consisted of student teaching, 1 semester in math, and 1 semester in physics, and then each semester 4 electives that I was taking in the higher math courses that the pure math majors had to take. So I graduated with all the requirements for teacher education and about 24 hours of higher math credits that I didn't need to graduate. During my 2 years of teaching after graduation, I continued to take higher math and some in-service classes at a local college. During those 2 years, I married, and my husband was awarded a fellowship to Virginia State to pursue a master's degree in biology. The next week, while I was attending the scheduled in-service class, I asked my professor, well, if you hear of any jobs in this area, I think I'm going to be moving to this area and I'd like to get a job here. And he said, oh, you're looking for a job in this area? He was the head of the math department. I said, yes. He says, oh, well, let me take you across the hall. The head of the physics department is looking for a research assistant in aerosol physics. We went across the hall, and I had that research assistantship before I went home that night. So it was, you know, if I had not taken all of those extra math courses, I would not have been able to probably get that assistantship, and I would not have been able to move on and get the master's degree, which it allowed me to do. By that time, I realized that I liked the applied mathematics. I liked to know what the equations stood for, the physical situation they were describing, and I liked to know what the answer to the equations were, what physical situation they were talking about. And so I got a master's degree in applied math. And 2 years later, when I graduated, I was hired by NASA. I was hired as a data analyst at NASA, and I was assigned to the re-entry physics branch. That would have been the branch which, before I got there, had done all of the calculations for how the Apollo had to come back into the atmosphere, the speed it had to come in, how hot the vehicle was going to get, whether it could withstand those temperatures, and make sure that the angle was exactly right so it would not bounce off of the atmosphere and go back out into space. So I didn't really ever do any of those calculations with the guys, but that was the work that had been done for the Apollo program. And of course they had done it for Apollo several years before I got there. So we all had mechanical calculators on our desk, like you saw in the movie if you saw it. And that was because electronic computers were just coming into NASA at that time. They had an IBM over in the computer building. None of the little fancy hot-shot calculators like the TI and the HP had been invented then. So we had mechanical calculators. I was told that the office supported the engineers in the branch. They would bring equations in to be solved. They would ask for plots to be made. They would sometimes bring in things, tapes to be read with the results of wind tunnel tests. So after working in the area for a few years, I realized that the engineers seemed to be doing the same type of work, or working with the same kind of equations that I worked with in graduate school. And that was really what I wanted to be doing. Now, I did not know exactly what engineers did when I was in high school. Monroe, my hometown, had a lot of trains coming through. They had a roundhouse and everything for trains. So I knew that they called the people that drove the trains engineers. But exactly what the other engineers did, I didn't know until I got to NASA. And the guys on the hall were all more theoretical engineers. They all worked with equations and everything. But I didn't understand that until I got there. So when I saw them doing this work and the kinds of equations they brought into me, I started thinking about working as an engineer. And soon after these thoughts started flowing in my mind, they offered a week-long Engineering 101 class, introductory class, and I took it. And I absolutely loved it. And so I began to ask about transferring to engineering. And I also began to start asking about going to graduate school at NASA, because they had a graduate program which offered a year's worth of graduate hours to the engineers. You could take it a course at a time, you could take it a semester at a time, or you could take the entire year off if you were approved for it. But human computers weren't approved to do that. So how do I get transferred to engineering? After I was told that I could not move to engineering by my immediate supervisor, I continued to work for several additional months. Then I decided I was going to go to a higher level director and ask about that. I knew it was a risky move, but I was willing to take that risk. And I told him I just wanted some information, and I said, I'd like to know about how job assignments are made here. I said I wanted to know why, when you have men and women coming in with pretty much the same backgrounds, that they are assigned to such different jobs. The women are placed in computer sections where they support the engineer, they don't give talks, they don't write papers, they don't get their names on papers, and they don't get promoted. Men, on the other hand, worked on their own projects, they gave talks, they wrote papers, and they got promoted. His comment to me was, nobody has ever asked me that question before. I said, well, I'm asking it now. And within 2 weeks, I was promoted and transferred to an engineering section. This was about 1972. Now, man's first supersonic flight faster than the speed of sound, was piloted by Chuck Yeager in 1947. It was then that scientists realized that supersonic flight was accompanied by a phenomena known as the sonic boom. The sonic boom, could you switch to the slides? The sonic boom is a noise that's heard when you have an instantaneous change in pressure on your ears. For instance, in this room, you've got a certain pressure on your ears. If I were to blow up a balloon, I have a higher pressure in the balloon than the pressure in the room. If I pop the balloon, there's a shock wave set up that goes at the speed of sound in every direction in this room. When that shock wave reaches your ear, the pressure on your ear jumps instantaneously from the normal pressure in the room to the pressure that was in the balloon. And you hear the balloon pop. So here we see a supersonic airplane. It is flying faster than the speed of sound. And all of the disturbances that are created by that airplane are contained within this cone that is kind of drawn in here so you can see it, connected with the nose of that aircraft. The molecules have to kind of move out of the way of the airplane, and other disturbances caused, all traveling at the speed of sound, are inside that cone because the airplane is traveling faster than the speed of sound. And where you see it intersect the ground, this could be at 50,000 feet in the atmosphere, it is always following the airplane. And where you see the dark area where the cone intersects the ground, you've got the higher pressure that was in this cone on the airplane. So if you're standing immediately in front of that dark area, you're in the normal pressure. And as that plane moves forward, that cone is moving, and an instant later, you're now in the higher pressure. So the change in the pressure is the sonic boom that you hear. And that is how it generally occurs. And so an airplane flying all the way across the continental United States would have this trailing it all the way. Now, during the 1960s, the United States, the Soviet Union, and the English and French jointly all decided they were going to build a supersonic transport, an SST they called it. Now, in preparation for this, the United States conducted a series of flight tests over Chicago and Oklahoma City. Thousands of complaint calls came in about cracked glass, about cracked sheetrock, and just about annoyances. And as a result of the results and the response that they got, the United States canceled its SST program. This would have been in the early 70s. Not only did they cancel the SST program, they enacted a law that said there could be no commercial supersonic flight over the continental United States. Other countries around the globe passed similar laws. The French built, do anybody know the name of their plane? The Concorde. They built the Concorde. The Russians, the Soviet Union, built the Tu-144. The Concorde, of course, flew from 1976 until about 10 or 12 years ago. But because of all the laws around, the only place they could fly supersonically was over water. They flew generally from between the United States and Europe, Washington and New York to Paris and London. There was a time when the Concorde flew from Washington down to Houston, but they had to fly subsonically when they were doing that, and that was tremendously inefficient. And so they basically flew only on those routes between the cities. The Concorde flew about 12 years, as I said, but it was not economically successful. It never made enough money to recover the development cost of that airplane. So the French and the English had to heavily subsidize that airplane. I called one time to find out the price of a ticket from New York over on the Concorde, and when I called, they quoted $6,000 from me. So it was quite expensive. Only the very rich people in the country were able to fly that airplane, and of course you can't recover the cost building only 14 airplanes. They only built 14 Concordes. The Tu-144 was built, and at a air show in Paris, it had an accident and caught a fire. They took it back to the Soviet Union. They flew it in the Soviet Union only as a cargo airplane and never as a passenger plane. When the economy of the Soviet Union kind of tanked when Al Gore was vice president, he wanted to kind of support the Soviet Union, so he actually arranged for us to do some flight tests in Russia using the Tu-144 for programs that we needed some supersonic data on. And so we did use it. We did have that program. So most Americans complain about the 4 to 5 hours it takes to fly from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific coast. They complain even more as the seats have gotten smaller. But people want to go faster and faster. So NASA needed to see if there was something, anything that could be done to reduce the impact of the sonic boom so that people could fly supersonically over land. Now, I was transferred to a group working on sonic boom minimization, and this transfer led me to a 15-year career working in and leading the sonic boom minimization program. My first assignment was to write a computer program based on a technical paper by Dr. Seabass and George at Cornell University, which was based on designing the airplane differently such that you met a certain equivalent area distribution. This one must not show the equivalent area. But the equivalent area distribution that we were working with means if you go along the axis of an airplane and you cut it perpendicularly, you can compute the area at that point on your axis. That is your area due to volume at that point. There's also another area on an airplane, that's the area due to lift. And your wings are the ones generating the lift on the airplane. The upper surface is rounded, so the air flows faster over the upper surface of the wing. The lower surface is flat, and the pressure is higher on the lower surface. So therefore, the resultant force on the wing of the airplane is in the upward direction, and that's the lift. So you do the same thing with the area due to lift on the airplane. Calculate what that area is along the axis, add the two areas, and this is the output of the code that I wrote. Typically, the area distribution on most military supersonic airplanes reaches a peak and then decreases for that airplane. When I got the code running after working on it in so many months, the area distribution that they said would give the minimizing sonic boom would be a smooth area curve that reached its peak at the tip of the area curve. And so once we got it working, one of the engineers who I was sharing an office with and I started designing airplanes to match the equivalent area for the 4 parameters that we were using as our guide. The Mach number is a description of the speed of sound. Mach 1 is the speed of sound. Mach 2 is 2 times the speed of sound, and so forth. So the Mach number, the altitude, the length, and the weight of the airplane would be the 4 parameters kind of determining the equivalent area. The airplane that you saw before was a very simple airplane. It was just the fuselage and the wing, a flat wing. That was one of our earlier designs. This one is a little bit more sophisticated. It's got tubes there representing the engines on the airplane, and we've got some twist and camber in the wings. We put these models were made of stainless steel. They cost about $6,000 or $7,000 because they had to be very exact in thickness and dimensions. So we tested these models in our supersonic wind tunnel. And this is the supersonic wind tunnel at Langley. It's 4 feet by 4 feet in the test section. The model is here. It turns sideways in the lower part of the screen. This pressure probe would be reading the pressure inside that cone that you saw before. And there's another pressure probe at the top of the screen that you can't quite see that would read the pressures outside of the cone. And of course, it is the difference in those pressures that causes the amount of noise you hear in the sonic boom. And so we tested all the models here. We would always test the baseline model, like just a plain delta wing that mimics some of the military supersonic planes that we had, to see that we would get something that approximated the N wave that they generally produce. The N wave, of course, is that instantaneous jump in pressure that we hear. And our original models were giving us, it looked like a shorter difference when in the models that we had designed to the equivalent area distribution. We did these tests, we analyzed our results, we wrote papers about them and gave them, and about that time the United States Congress decided that they were going to stop funding the supersonic work for a while. And that's one of the problems of working in the government, that we are totally dependent on them for our funds. At roughly the same time, so when we stopped that research, we stopped funding, that was about 1980. And about the same time, in 1980, I began to work on my doctorate in mechanical engineering. I felt that I needed a degree in engineering. I had the background in mathematics, I had the background in physics, and I had the background in applied mathematics, and I felt that the shift was manageable. I will tell you that my biggest fear in enrolling in the program was I knew that my classes would all be white males and me. And that was frightening. My entire educational background had been in a segregated environment. And so I struggled with this decision for a while, but then I said, I'm going to do it. And from then on, the efforts that I had spent worrying about that being the situation, I transferred those efforts to making sure I was going to be successful in my classes. And at first, nobody in the class spoke to me. But after the first test, a couple of the guys came over and invited me to join their study group. And I said, sure. So we went through the remainder of the program together, and I had some very good friends in that program. With part-time school while working full-time, it took me 10 years to finish that Doctorate of Science in Mechanical Engineering. Now, while we were not being funded for the sonic boom work, I actually transferred and did some classified work, working with some of the military people. But then in 1987, Congress again funded some work for supersonic cruise environmental problems. I was brought back out of the classified area. We had to hunt down the team members who had learned to run the programs and had worked in it before. And they had all scattered for those 7 years. And then I was asked to organize a national workshop on sonic boom, from sonic boom experts. So I went and found a lot of the old sonic boom reports that had been written back in the 60s and 70s, and got the names of the persons doing the sonic boom work and where they were located. And about 150 people from Boeing, from McDonnell Douglas, from NASA Ames, NASA Lewis, NASA Langley, of course, Texas A&M, and Penn State came to Langley for us to discuss for 2 or 3 days the framework of the sonic boom program that we were getting ready to launch again. One of the first main questions, of course, was, has there been progress in one area that would have a huge impact on the sonic boom area, such as composite materials, which would be a lot lighter, which would mean we wouldn't have the weight of the metal aircraft, and so we could have a tremendous benefit there. We talked about that we didn't depend on that as we planned the program. So what our results was we would have a 3-pronged program. We would have one area called the design and operation of the airplane. Now, of course, I had been working on the design of the airplane, but there are certain elements that we have to worry about how we're flying the airplane. If you are accelerating the airplane, and of course, as you do when you're taking off, the waves from the airplane coalesce and you can get very loud noises from it. If you are turning a curve at these high speeds, the angles coalesce and you can also get high speeds. And so you have to worry about where you're flying and where the shock is landing as you're flying the airplane. The second area would be how this signal comes through the atmosphere from 50 or 55 or 60,000 feet. What does the atmosphere do to the sonic boom signal? Are we going to spend a lot of time trying to get a good signal and then have the atmosphere destroy it? So for that work, we actually did some tests at White Sands in New Mexico using military aircraft from Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. We would measure the signals in the morning when the atmosphere was quiet and very calm. And then we would measure the signals in the afternoon when it had heated up and you had a lot of turbulence in the atmosphere. And we saw the scatter that was caused in the signals because of the turbulence in the atmosphere. The third area of research would be in human response. And that is our acoustics people we built a sonic boom simulator that people could sit in and hear the different shapes of the booms. We also put computer-generated computer-generated boom boxes in people's homes that played randomly. And when they heard a sonic boom, they would go to the computer and answer their response to it, how disturbing it was to it, and things like that. And we actually did some, surveyed people on the West Coast that worked in the areas of flight test in the West Coast, in Nevada and in California. Can you adjust to a sonic boom? Would you get used to it and it not bother you? So, and one of the other things is, are we measuring the right parameter in that sonic boom? Because we've got that front shock, which can be very loud, but then when you're inside a house, you have the impulse that's inside this signature, which excites the vibrations of the house itself. And we had to be concerned about that. So those were the three areas of the sonic boom program that we worked. Well, for the design area that we had been working on in the 70s, we were pretty comfortable with the work that the results that we had gotten in the program. And said we have shown that that theory works, the theory of the code that I wrote. But then the Boeing folks said, well, wait a minute, we can't say problem solved. We need to know what this does in the atmosphere. So at first we thought we could use a missile to do a flight test in the atmosphere. We got a missile. We had an 18-wheeler drive all the way from Utah to Langley, bringing a missile and all the parts. And after we did some work with it, we found out we couldn't use that for the test. So we borrowed 2 F-5s from the Air Force. And this is one of those F-5s that has had extra paneling put on it to make the equivalent area of this vehicle match the equivalent area target that we had been using in all of our design work. And then we flew this over the Mojave Desert in California. The airplane at the bottom with the camouflage coating is the F-5 with no changes. That's the regular N-wave that you would get from the F-5 flying supersonically. The modified F-5 is in the middle. The airplane at the top is an F-15, which is measuring signals at the altitude off of the other 2 airplanes. And the way they do these tests, they measure at the altitude of flight, then they have slower airplanes measuring the signal all the way to the ground so that you got a picture of how this signal is changing all the way to the ground. And the day that this test was done in California, I was not there, but one of my friends called me, and you could hear the engineers in the room shouting, just like you heard the engineers when John Glenn came back safely into the atmosphere. I mean, it was a successful test. They got an N-wave from the camouflaged airplane. We got a simulation of a cut-off end, but a much shorter shock and kind of flat for the modified airplane. And this is what we were looking for. So we said, okay, this has proved the sonic boom theory that we were working on. That was in 2002. And so we said, well, the next thing that we need to do is design a supersonic airplane from scratch. Integrate the low sonic boom technology from scratch so that you've got an efficient supersonic airplane, you've got the low boom characteristics, and then do tests with that airplane to make sure it works. Well, since 2002, NASA has been waiting on the money to build this full-size supersonic airplane. This is an airplane that was designed, and I think this one was by Lockheed Martin, Skunk Works. And this is an artist's rendition of an airplane that they have designed that is the integrated low boom supersonic X-plane. So NASA is supposed to build, to let a contract in FY 2018. I think the low speed X-plane will not be built right now, but the plans are to build the supersonic X-plane start building it in FY 2017. No, 19, what is this year? Anyway, let the contract this year so that they can start building the airplane. They believe it will be finished by 2021. Then they would start doing the flight test. A wind tunnel model of this vehicle is in the Langley wind tunnel, low-speed wind tunnel right now. They are testing the low-speed characteristics of this airplane. Since it is built to fly fast, they got to make sure that it flies slowly, okay. And so they've got to take off, they've got to land, and so they're doing the test right now that the handling characteristics of this airplane would be okay at low speed. And so in 2021, when they start doing the flight test, they'll take it through all the supersonic and low speed characteristics, but then they will start flying that airplane over people like you. And then they will get your feedback on, could you accept this noise? And the data that they get back, especially if it's good, NASA will take to the FAA and ask them to consider changing the rule such that there could be supersonic flight over land in characteristics. And if that is successful, then a flight from the East Coast to the West Coast might be done in about 2.5 hours. And so that is always the reaction I get from them. So that's where we are, and I'm a little bit hepped up and excited about this because I'm seeing something that I worked on hopefully come to fruition, and hopefully they will be able to change the rule. If they change the rule, then we'll see American and Delta and all of these companies buying supersonic airplanes and flying supersonic airplanes across the country, and I think that they would be commercially successful. NASA and the United States would, if they're successful, would also have to negotiate with the noise groups all around the country, all around the world, because they too would have to change their noise laws such that there could be supersonic flight. And so that's about 40 years of my career. I went into higher management. I completed my I think the funding was going away again, so I went into a career development program into the senior executive service. I spent about 5 months working at Lockheed Martin in Marietta, Georgia, worked at NASA headquarters to see how we work with Congress and everything, and had 3 senior executive positions before I retired in 2007. My career, I was reading something last night, how do you know you're working the right job? Do you feel, are you happy to go to work every day? Are you excited about the work you do when you get there every day? And I will have to say that once I changed out of the computer pool, I was extremely happy to go to work every day. I was happy with the work that I did. It wasn't boring. I had varying jobs. I gave talks. I wrote computer programs, I did wind tunnel tests, I gave briefings to people coming in to visit the center, and I worked with technical people all over the country who were working on the same problems. So it was an extremely exciting career. Now, people often ask me, did I have mentors during my career? The only time I had a mentor was when I went into that official career development program, and I did the term at Lockheed Martin. But I've had lots of bosses who, just in casual conversation with the bosses, would give me advice. And I have always considered that being mentored, that they are giving me advice that I need to listen to and that I need to do. And so I have been certainly been mentored in that respect. And so that was my career at NASA, and I think there's going to be some time for questions. And okay, so we'll open the house for any questions. Yes?
With these faster planes, do they need more space for landings?
I guess the runway would certainly have to be long enough for them to slow down, to stop within that speed. So I'm not sure how long, but people would be working that area, certainly. Yes?
What do you think the price would be for that trip?
Well, I don't know, but of course, when the price goes down as they sell hundreds and thousands of airplanes, so they amortize the cost of the development of the plane over all of the airplanes, and so that causes the price to go down, and that's why the Concorde didn't go down, because they only had 14 airplanes, so that they have to sell airplanes to make money. Yes.
Do you see more women entering the mathematics
profession and into jobs such as NASA and other?
The number of women at NASA changed tremendously after I got there. There weren't that many women engineers there when I got there. And there were, the older male engineers didn't particularly want to work with the women. I mean, they had not been with them in school. But in the 80s, I would say that the young engineers that were being hired had been in classes with the female engineers. And I think it totally changed. And there were lots of women coming in the door. Most of them having an engineering degree now, because they were getting the engineer's degree. So I think that's been a change. We had our first female center director when about the same time I retired, about 10 years ago.
Wow.
Now at one time when they were trying to accelerate the promotion of women, they kind of chose 3 or 4 women and made them head of a group without going through maybe all of the steps that other managers would go through to get to a position, and it failed. You know, they really had to go through some steps to be prepared to be that manager for those people, and so that project didn't work.
Okay.
Yeah, but it has really changed as for women in the center now. Yes.
First of all, thank you so much for being here. This is fascinating. I can't even pronounce some of those engineering things you said. But can you talk a little bit, I think everybody would be really interested in the personal side of your life too, and understanding having kids and how you manage your life, because
yes,
we have a great example back here.
Yeah, that was pretty rough. Actually, one of the things when Janet was in high school, I had an opportunity to go to Washington, and I turned it down because I said I'm not going to leave her in Hampton by herself with her dad, and I am. Well, I didn't mean for it to sound like that. But I thought I needed to be there with her, and I did not want to take her to Washington and have her change high schools. So I declined that opportunity until she had gone to college, and I no longer had that issue to worry about. But when the children were younger, I got in Toastmasters. One of my talks was about the juggler, and that was about trying to juggle between getting the kids to music lessons and gymnastics lessons and school and back, and just lots of other things. So there were a lot of problems trying to. I'm feeding back at a certain point. I think there were a lot of problems, you know, just trying to make sure that they got what they needed, and I, you know, work on my career too. And there are a lot of guilty feelings sometimes in doing that. And when I was in graduate school, there would be weekends where I spent most of the weekends studying out at the base because it was quiet and I could study. So there were lots of barriers and things you worried about in doing that, but I pushed to do it. Yes.
You've mentioned your 4 or 5 P's, and one of them was to really begin by perceiving your dream job. But when you started school, realistically, it was just mathematics in general. Like, how could you have perceived supersonic flight so early on?
Okay, yeah, I did. Well, yeah, and so the mathematics was in general. My first application when I finished school, I actually thought about being an actuary. And I applied to the University of Chicago in their actuarial program, and I didn't get accepted. And so, you know, you just keep going. And then this other avenue opened up. And I found, like I said, when I was taking a lot of these classes, it looked like a lot of the applied math problems were at the back of the book. And the teacher never got to the back of the book. And you would say, you know, gosh, I wish they had done that because these problems are more interesting. When I would be helping students with math in colleges and everything, why do I have to learn this? What is it good for? When am I ever going to use it again? And those are the questions they ask. And so it was mathematics, but the mathematics and the applied mathematics and the physics all merged into this engineering job, which now it was my dream job.
So, sorry, so then my question then is, as far as like perceiving your dream job and driving you toward that ultimate, your life's work, what was at the top of this hierarchy of vision, like what that you valued most and wanted to see yourself doing? Because certainly you couldn't have known the details, but like realistically, what was driving you?
Okay, well, of course, when I got into the sonic boom work, the driving is that we can reduce that sonic boom such that it can fly over land, and we would have solved that problem, such that you can get from Los Angeles to Australia in 6 or 7 hours rather than 14 hours and things like that. So that would have been the driving force then. And even the teaching. I mean, I have certainly thought about the fact that when I was teaching school, when you're teaching a child and you see the light come on in their eyes, you're getting immediate gratification. Well, this is 40 years later, I'm looking at this. So the gratification is not always as rapid. And I have certainly thought about that. But now we want, now I say, well, we would really like for you to get excited about this and do your work in school and try to help with a lot of the problems we're seeing with a lot of our kids now. Yes?
You mentioned that by the time you got to NASA, there was no longer segregation. I'm assuming there might still have been some discrimination, and I'm wondering if you could talk about high or low points that you recall.
Okay, well now when I got there, I thought the job assignments was partly discrimination, because now this was white and black females. We were all in computer pools, and the engineers were all in engineering. I think I saw one male kind of working as a computer. So I thought that was a form of discrimination, possibly. I did not discover much discrimination. And the segregation went away because NASA Langley started as the first aeronautics center back in 1917. After World War I, and the English and the French developed the airplane so much, and people told the United States, you need to get your airplane work done. The president formed the NACA, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. It was just called a committee. But they built their first laboratory in Hampton, Virginia. And they had wind tunnels there and everything else. And the men, they started getting all this data. And the engineers that they were hiring had to solve the problems and reduce the data and write reports using their slide rules. So they started complaining, saying, hey, this is too much work for us, we can't do this. They decided they would hire women. So in 1935, they started hiring female white graduates in mathematics to come in and work, do the calculations. And in the early 40s, they still had a need. A. Philip Randolph, who was a labor leader, black labor leader, went to President Roosevelt and said, with the war coming on, could you do an executive order saying that no defense area could have any discrimination in their hiring? He wrote that executive order, so then black females in mathematics could also be hired. Dorothy Bond was in the first group in 1943. And so that they were segregated, I guess, when they got there, I guess because of Virginia laws, I'm believing. So when Sputnik went up in 1957, and NACA gets changed to NASA, it's now a federal agency, then the segregated computer pool went away, and they had the computer pools with each branches, and they were black and white, or whatever there was to be there. And so they were mixed, and so the segregation was no longer there. I actually learned in the book about some of the discrimination maybe in promotions. Something I did not know, and somebody in the Federal Women's Program Office said that they went to bat for me in some of the higher up meetings because I had done the work, but I had not been promoted. And so they went to bat, and I actually got a promotion because of that. But I didn't know that until I read the book, because I, of course, wasn't in any of those meetings. You know, there was some discrimination, but for the most part, I thought it was a great place to work, and I actually said that to one of our attorneys one day. I said, you know, the people I work with are great, and you know, and I've really been happy. She said, you just haven't worked in the right places out here. and so I think there were other offices, shops, and things like that where there were bigger problems than the engineering sections where folks were focusing more on the work that they were doing, I believe. Yes?
So you persisted, you refined your purpose throughout the years. You said 10 years you got your PhD.
Yes.
40 years to see the fruits of your labor. What advice would you give as young women and men, me not so young, as to why they should keep going and keep the purpose in mind, and what are the characteristics that can let them there?
I think I had a friend who was a singer one time, and she was struggling over whether to go back to college and get a BS degree and move on and everything. And I said, well, you know what, in 5 years, if you don't go to school, you're going to be 5 years old. If you do go to school, you'll be 5 years old, and maybe you'll have that degree. You'll have that degree. And she actually looked at that and decided she was going back to school. And she got the BS, she went on and got a master's. She ended up teaching voice in college for the last 15 years. And so you always don't know exactly what's waiting on you. But when you think that that time is going to pass anyway, and you can just kind of waste that time, or you can use that time to achieve something that you really, really want, and it's going to really mean a lot to you. I think that is one of the motivating forces, of course. You said some of the characteristics that help get you there. Well, like I said, if you had something out there that you really wanted to achieve, I think that is one of the pushing forces that makes you go on and do certain things. And I think for me, it might have been the biggest pushing thing, that I really wanted to get to that job, and I wanted to do it, and I wanted to be treated like all the rest of the engineers out there working. That was a big thing within me. So, you know, I did a Girl Scout talk a couple of weeks ago out in California, and they were using girl. They said they want those people to have characteristics of being a go-getter, being an innovator, take risk, and be a leader, influence other people around you. And those were the characteristics that they said that they wanted to see in their Girl Scouts. And I took that one and kind of combined it with what I thought had been pushing me, and showed how many of the things were the same. And one was talking particularly about a career, the other was just talking about the characteristics of that person in general. So I don't know if I answered your question or not, but yes.
First of all, thank you for coming. This has been great. While we have you, can you tell us a story about Janet that she doesn't want us to hear?
She's been a great daughter. So I appreciate her. She still buys a lot of things for me, and the only time I get compliments is something she bought for me.
That's time, you guys. Thank you so much for doing this today. Everyone, thank you for coming. We hope you enjoyed it. And maybe check the ground for pictures.